So welcome to our May 2021 technical meeting. Here's the agenda for today. A couple of training opportunities, some new business items, and then our main topic for the meeting is we wanted to talk about some pre-existing conditions that must be addressed by weatherization. So it's been interesting to think about these ones. I think this one might spur some discussion, hopefully during this meeting, and I suspect some discussion at each of your agencies afterwards. So, but yeah, when we get to it, please feel free to join in and ask any questions you have. This one may be a little controversial, and that's okay. But just as usual, I'll just jump into the training opportunities and then into that new business stuff. So the couple of training opportunities that are coming up in June, for the last couple of years, we've held a meeting each year to basically create a new setup and fuel library for the year. And so I'm going to hold that meeting on June 7th. I will hold it at the IWTC. So if any of you want to join in person, you're welcome to come join there. And then I'll also have we'll just do a webinar as well, so you can join via Google Meet. I think last year the meeting lasted about 2 hours. So, you know, choose whatever works best for you. I will send a link out to the coordinators, and I'm inviting at least one person from every agency to join. But you're welcome to have more than that. If you have personnel that are, you know, you're trying to train on, then please invite them to come with you if you'd like, or to join in. The other training opportunity is we have put an Auditor 101 class on the calendar. We're going to be holding that class June 14th through the 17th. We are planning to hold that class in person. And per the governor issued some stuff recently that says on June 15th, we'll be able to hold larger in-person stuff without masks and other things, as long as things continue to go well. So unless we hear otherwise, we're planning to hold that one in person at the IWTC. We'll still have plenty of room to spread out, and you're always welcome to wear masks and things like that. We'll be practicing a lot of the protocols that we have been for the last year anyway. But that class, I'm not really limiting the size of that class, because that class we can have a larger class for. But I am going to close the registration for that class this week, because I need to do a food order. So I need a final count. I think we have 8 or 9 people signed up for that class right now. But if you would like to attend, please talk to your coordinator and reach out to me this week and let me know that you'd like to be there. And coordinators, if you have any personnel, you know, or plan to have any personnel that may need to be there, let me know this week so we can plan accordingly. If you have attended that class in the past and you feel like it would be a good refresher, talk to your coordinator. You are welcome to join that class again. I don't mind if you come a second time. So anyway, anybody have any questions about those training opportunities, or is anybody aware of any other opportunities that would be good for the group to know about? All right, I'm here in silence. Maybe Dalton or other state staff, if you guys will watch the chat in case anybody has comments, and then let me know as we're going along. That would be great. All right, for the new business, I've actually got a slide for each one of these bullets, so I'm going to skip them and I'll just jump into the slides, and then, or not skip them, I'll just jump into the slides to go through them, and then we'll get into the main topic. So the first one there is just a reminder. We've been doing this every month, reminding you guys about these WAP award nominations. Brad did send out a link about a month ago. So the award nominations are open right now. I think he's going to be wrapping them up in the coming days or weeks. So if you have any other nominations, make sure to get them in. Anybody have any questions on that? The next item was an item Dalton wanted to talk about. So Dalton, I'll let you talk about it and just tell me when to.
Okay. Yep. So I wanted to bring up a standard in our field guide that we aligned with the new SWS. They changed in SWS, they updated what the specification on water heater blankets and what's allowed. And in the new SWS, it says that you need to select an installation that is a minimum of R10 and has a flame spread and smoke development index of 25 to 450 or less when tested in accordance with ASTM E84 or UL 723. So I know, and I got looking into some of the water heater blankets that are available online, and most of them meet maybe one of those requirements, but not the other. I couldn't find very many that met both the R value and the UL listing. So I wanted to bring this up to you guys because we need to make sure that the materials we're installing meet this standard. And I put out, most of you coordinators know I emailed all of you and asked for these specifications on the water heater blankets you guys are installing. And 2 of the agencies came back with materials that meet both of these specifications. The rest of you agencies came back with a water heater blanket that only meant one or the other. So I wanted to just show you the 2 that meet this specification so you guys can change what you're buying and installing. You'll note that both, you can go ahead and change to the next slide, Turner. Both products that we're looking at here, neither one of them are actually sold as water heater blankets. I could not find online a water heater blanket that met both these specifications that's being sold as a water heater blanket. This first one is actually duct wrap. It comes in 4-foot wide by 25-foot long rolls. And if you get it in the 3-inch, it meets the R10 value that you need. And then it also meets the smoke development and flame spread testing, and they got the listing for that. This is a product that Bragg uses. I don't know, Jesse, are you online with us today, Jesse? Wait.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, would you just maybe talk about this product for just a second on how is it easy to use, or I don't know, some of the characteristics with it, with installing it as a heater blanket?
It's just the foil-faced FSK we use for, like you said, duct wrap, and we get it from Eagle Rock. 4-foot wide rolls, 25 feet long. We just tape it on with FSK tape and use some water heater blanket straps. We still use those, but it works pretty good.
Yeah, so he's just getting this one from Eagle Rock there in Salt Lake. So, and if you have any questions about getting this product, you can reach out to me and I can get you the information on Eagle Rock and stuff. Turner, you want to go to the next slide? And this is the one that Utah Community Action's using. And it's actually a metal building installation. And it's kind of the same thing where it's a 4-foot wide roll. I don't know if anybody from Yucca would want to talk to this at all about using it, how well it works, or any characteristics like that. But anyways, I wanted to review that standard with you guys, and then review a couple materials that will meet that standard. So you might have to change what you're using. What you have in your inventory may not be allowed anymore. So figure that out. Do you guys have any questions on that? No. Scott just asked, can we finish using what we have in stock? And I would say no, not if it don't meet that standard. You cannot, and it's got to meet both of those, the R value. So it's got to be at least an R10, and then it's got to have one of the UL listings, or it's not allowed. So, and that's why I wanted to show you these two materials. Mike or Tina or somebody from Utah Community Action, where are you guys purchasing this material that you guys use?
We get it from Eagle Rock too.
Okay, so that seems to be the place to order this from. Sounds like they got a couple options. So, yeah, that's all I had. Unless you guys have some questions.
Cool. Thanks, Dalton.
Okay. Yep.
A couple other quick items before we jump into the main topic. I finally sat down and created a version of the worst case draft test that can be filled out using the Adobe Reader, which is the free app. I wanted this because I have an Android phone and I didn't have or hadn't found a good app that would let me fill out the other version. So if you've had that problem, I will send out a copy of this with the email that I send out for today's meeting. And you can use that to fill out the worst case draft form on your phone. Also, if you are an Android user, when I was in the process of doing this, the Adobe Reader works pretty good. It's not that simple to save this file when you're done. So I did go looking to see if there was a good app for an Android to fill out a PDF. And I found that this, I don't know how to pronounce it, but this XODO, that is a good app. That works great and it's free. So anyway, I'll send that out. If that's a problem you've been having, maybe that will help you guys out in the field. But for years, I've been filling this out on my iPad using PDF Expert, and that has worked great. But I've been liking just filling stuff out on my phone. Feels a little quicker to me. So
should have got an iPhone.
I know I should have got an iPhone. It's true. But anyway, a couple other things. Some of you may get some emails from the Energy Conservatory, and if you do, you've already seen this, but just wanted to make sure everybody in the network was aware. If you own any of the DG1000s, the Energy Conservatory did just recently release another software update, and they don't push those updates to the equipment because the equipment's not online all the time. So you do have to manually go and install the updates. So hit up their website and you can find the link to do the download and do the update. But some of the stuff I don't think we'd ever use a standalone logging, at least not in normal weatherization. But they have added something with their tubing assist that helps you with duct leakage to the outside. I have not actually downloaded that and tried it yet. But if it's anything like all the other tubing assist stuff, I anticipate that it will work great and it will help you in this case if you're out there trying to do a duct blaster test. So you may want to update your software on your DG1000s. Also, they have some sort of program right now. I have not dug into the details, so you might find that it's not that great. But at least based off their email, they're offering $300 off of the list price of a GG1000 if you turn in an old DG700. So if that is of interest to any of you, you'll want to reach out to the Energy Conservatory and find out more about that. The other thing I wanted to just make sure everybody is aware of, and so the DG700s, they have stopped buying, manufacturing, whatever, some of the parts to the DG700s. So the Energy Conservatory has basically said they'll service the DG700s for a while, but they no longer have parts to like fix them. And so they're kind of, becoming extinct. So they have the DG1000, which many of you have. They've also recently introduced this little guy, which is a DG8, and you can see that it is a single channel manometer. So if you are missing having that DG700 that you can walk around and do some zonals with, this might be an affordable option to you. Also, is it RetroTech? They have some manometer options as well. So please don't feel like I'm only selling you energy conservatory stuff. I really like RetroTech stuff too. But anyway, it's a tool. Just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of. Oh, I had two other things. These were some things I noticed out in the field as I've been monitoring this year, and I just thought they were really cool and wanted to share them. So this came from an auditor in Salt Lake. I noticed that this was how the auditor was documenting their windows or labeling their windows in their audit file. So they were, instead of having, you know, diagrams that sometimes can be confusing, they do use diagrams to show the thermal boundary and square footage and stuff, but they were labeling all their windows on some of their photos. So it was very, very clear and easy to see. When I saw E7 in the audit, I knew exactly what window they were talking about. So if that will help you when you're documenting your stuff, there's something to think about. I thought it was kind of cool. The other thing was this. We have a new auditor down in Richfield, Kurt Daly, and I was working with him a couple weeks ago, and he showed me some of his site sketches, and this is what they look like. And I realized they look kind of detailed, but these are the best site sketches I have ever seen in our program. They have all of the appropriate details on them, and they're very, very clear and easy to understand. And he is using this app called ArcSite. It is a paid app. I think he said he pays whatever 15 times 12 is. So $100 and something a year to have the app on his tablet. But he demonstrated it for me, and I can see that he can draw this on his tablet as fast as I can draw it on paper. So if that's of interest to any of you auditors out there, or any QCIs, or anybody who could use that tool, you know, check into that if you'd like to. So anyway, those were the smaller items I wanted to discuss. So let's jump into the topic for today, unless anybody has any questions or concerns about anything so far. All right. So our topic is pre-existing conditions that must be addressed by weatherization. And this is not a comprehensive list, but it covers most of the things that you'll run into. Like there's a few other little anomalies out there, but we're not going to spend time on them today. But we've noticed that we often run into pre-existing venting issues, like for combustion appliances. We run into pre-existing exhaust fan issues, dryer vent issues, and then attic scuttle issues. And I wanted to take some time to talk about each of those. And as we start to talk about that, I wanted to point out what type of measure each of them are. So for venting issues, if you ran into a pre-existing venting issue and you were going to address it as a weatherization measure, what type of measure would it be? Is this an ECM, an HSM, an IRM, or an NAM?
An HSM.
Yeah. Yeah, the venting issues are going to be HSMs typically. What about exhaust fan issues?
HSM.
And dryer vent issues?
HSM.
And attic scuttle issues? So attic scuttle issues, the silence is telling. Attic scuttle issues are not HSMs. They're typically going to be addressed as either part of the measure, or they're going to like a part of an ECM, or you'll take care of them as an NAM. But I wanted to point out that these first three items are all HSMs. They're all health and safety measures. And so what governs health and safety measures? Well, the rules about health and safety. So let's take that first one and start talking about it. Like when are you required to fix a pre-existing venting issue? So let's take a look at the definition of a health and safety measure and just kind of make sure that's in the back of our mind as we're talking about all these issues today. So Section E of our guidelines is where we have all the information about health and safety. And the very first thing in Section E is the definition of a health and safety measure. And there's like four or five parts to it, and you have to remember all of them. But once you've got this down, then it actually makes your life a lot easier when you're trying to determine, well, is this a legitimate health and safety measure, or do I address it some other way? So I'm going to read through this really quick, and let's think about the different parts and pieces to this. So it says an allowable energy-related health and safety actions are those actions that are necessary to maintain the physical well-being of both the occupants and the weatherization workers where, and it's like where the following applies. So the first part of this is that these actions are necessary to maintain the physical well-being of the occupants and the weatherization workers. The second part is that the costs must be reasonable. So costs are reasonable as determined by DOE and in accordance with the grantee's approved plan. So that's why we have that major measure or cost limit for health and safety measures, that you can't go above $1,100 or $1,200, whatever that number is right now. So that's the first part of it. And then it says the next part is the actions must be taken to effectively perform weatherization work, or the actions are necessary as a result of weatherization work. So all of these pieces apply. First off, it has to be necessary to maintain the physical well-being of both the occupants and the weatherization workers. Secondly, it has to be the costs have to be reasonable. And then thirdly, the action must be taken you're doing this to either effectively perform weatherization work, or you're doing it because it's a result of weatherization work. Something you did in weatherization has now caused this health and safety problem. You did a bunch of weatherization air sealing, and now the water heater is backdrafting. So, and then the last part of this is this. It says that no HSMs can be performed on a home unless ECMs are also part of the scope of work. And that one's really not a huge problem for us. I see that as a very, very, very low risk, but it's an important thing to think about. We don't have, basically, if you don't have an ECM, you shouldn't be weatherizing the house. But we typically always have an ECM because we always have an opportunity to do some air sealing on every home. But they have put that in there for some reason, so they must have run into some issues somewhere in the program where people were trying to do health and safety stuff when they didn't have any ECMs to do. But anyway, so all those pieces are part of it, and if you don't have all of those things, then you don't have a legitimate HSM. So again, back to this question about when are we required to fix a pre-existing venting issue? Well, as an HSM, there's really two opportunities that we have to fix that. And the first one is going to be, like, there's a table of issues in Section E, and that's Section E7, and it has a bunch of different things in there. So I'll just slide this onto my screen so you can see it. So table E7 has all these issues. There's air conditioning, asbestos, biological and sanitary conditions, building structure, code compliance, combustion gases, and so on. Really, the only two issues here that apply to a pre-existing venting issue are code compliance and combustion gases. And so I wanted to talk about those two things for a minute and talk about how they would apply to a pre-existing venting issue. So combustion gases is the first one. And for each of these table of issues, there's a section on allowability, and then there's another section on tests that you're required to perform, and there's a few other things. So what I have on the screen is not the entire section. It's just it's just part of that first section on what is actionable or allowable. For the comprehensive, all of the information, please take the time to read through the whole section. But when it comes to combustion gases, I wanted to point out, so first off, it says that adequate combustion air and proper venting to the outside for combustion appliances is required. So including gas dryers, refrigerators, furnaces, all of that, it's required. So if we're going to install a new appliance, it's required. But what if there's a pre-existing issue going on? Well, down here on bullet number 3, Roman numeral 3, it says you need to correct venting, high CO, and combustion air issues when testing indicates that there's a problem. And it points out that says addressing pre-existing venting and combustion air issues is an allowable HSM when the issue will be exacerbated by weatherization and there is one or more ECM that's part of the scope of work. And so basically, we could have left this stuff right out of the guidelines because this was already established in the definition of a health and safety measure. But in order to address this, all of the parts of the definition of a health and safety measure must be there. These are 2 of them. That the pre-existing venting issue is going to exacerbate some weatherization, and it has to have an ECM as part of the scope of work. Let me go back to the definition. So the action is necessary as a result of weatherization work, because we're going to do something that's going to make the problem worse, and you have to have an ECM. So that's really where that language came from. It's just a reminder that if you're going to do anything as an HSM, it has to meet the definition of an HSM. So if you have a pre-existing venting issue, you could address it as under combustion gases if it's going to make, if whatever you're doing when in weatherization is going to make the problem worse. Or if you're installing a new appliance, then it basically has to, meet, it can't have any of these issues. You wouldn't want to install a new appliance and then install a improper vent or whatever that would cause a problem. The second part of that would be if you're going to address it under code compliance, and our guidelines talk about that too. The correction of pre-existing code compliance issues is not an allowable cost unless it's triggered by weatherization measures being installed in a specific room or area of the home. So if you go in and you see a code compliance issue with a vent on a water heater, you actually cannot address it unless we're doing something in weatherization that then triggers that code compliance to be required. So I've got a few examples that hopefully will help, clear this up a little bit. So here's example number 1. And this is the discussion part. So if insulation is touching a pre-existing B vent in an attic, when do you install insulation, an insulation dam, and when would you leave this alone? What do you guys think? When would you, give me some examples of when you would need to install an insulation dam in this scenario?
When we're going to be adding more insulation.
That's a great example. So if we were going to add some more, we wouldn't want our new insulation touching that high temperature vent, right? Because that would be a fire hazard. What other examples? When else would we need to install something here?
Attic air sealing.
Yeah, that's a great one. So if you were going to do some air sealing around the base of this vent, now that you've touched that vent, you would also include some insulation damming to prevent that issue. When would you leave it alone? When would we not touch this?
If you don't have to enter the attic for any reason at all.
Okay. What if, like, we've entered the attic because we had to run an audit, but
If there was vermiculite in the attic, you wouldn't do anything with it.
that's a good example. What if we enter the attic and we work on the attic scuttle? Do we have to do anything with this B vent? If we're not adding insulation, and if we're not air sealing this B vent, and if we're not touching the appliance that it's connected to, then we have no legitimate reason under the weatherization rules to fix this.
Okay, so question.
Yeah.
What about say you're up there installing a fan venting or something? With our incident a couple of years ago, I think there's grounds that you could be guilty if there's an issue with the house.
So for the rest of the group, so that they understand, you guys had an incident where you actually had a home that, did it start smoldering or something? What was the deal?
The whole house burnt down, yeah.
Oh, the house burnt down. So you guys weatherized the house, and
But
then
because we were in the attic and we did work up there, we were to blame.
Gotcha.
Though it's a pre-existing issue like this.
Yeah.
So
So
they didn't have any. I mean, we had pictures of like what it was before and after, and we were still to blame.
Yeah.
Because we were up there.
So I hope most of you guys are squirming and you're uncomfortable with me saying that if we don't have any, if we're not touching this, we leave it alone. What can we do so that we make sure that we put an insulation dam on every home that we touch?
Wouldn't that be a health and safety measure?
It is a health and safety measure, but if we're not adding attic insulation and we're not air sealing around this and we're not touching the appliance, we don't have any legitimate reason under weatherization to touch it. So what can we do on every house to make sure that we put an insulation dam around this vent?
Air seal around it.
Thank you. That's it. On every house, you can make sure that you're air sealing around that. Even if it was air sealed before, it may not have been air sealed well. So please check on these. I suspect that I don't think we'll find very many homes where the air sealing is up to our standard.
Even
with
vermiculite, it would still be under the de minimis.
Yeah, that's a good question on vermiculite, you may be able to address it where if you're disturbing less than a certain amount, it could be under the de minimis. It's a good point. So it's interesting though, like as Dalton and I have been out monitoring, we were looking at some of these and we're like, why are these not getting addressed? And we think everyone should be addressed. But when we go back and look at the guidelines, there is room in our guidelines for you to not touch these, but I hope that makes you feel dirty. Like we really should be addressing these every time we can. And there is room in our guidelines for us to address this every time, but it means that we have to address it as an air sealing measure, or, if we are touching that appliance, then you need to come up and make sure that the venting is up to code and up to standards and things like that. How you guys feeling about this one? Any questions on that? Oh, I was going to show you the guidance in our new field guide, but I'll do that on this next one because it applies just the same. So kind of a similar situation. What if you have a pre-existing unlined masonry chimney that has attic insulation touching it? What do we do there? When would you add in an insulation dam?
air sealing around it and also adding insulation.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really the same scenario as the last one. There's some instances where if you're not touching any of it, it could be left alone, but I hope that you guys cringe at that a little bit. And I hope that you guys will look for opportunities to actually fix this. One of the things I want to talk about with that is that in the new field guide, this is the section on air seal and dam high temperature penetrations in the attic. So high temperature penetrations would be vents and, you know, chimneys and stuff like that they're gonna warm up when the appliance is turned on. But if you look at under the very first step, it says you need to ensure the clearance for combustibles, and it says non-combustible materials. No combustible materials can be within 1 inch of a listed B vent. And it says no combustible materials or sealants shall be within 6 inches of all other high temp penetrations. There are some venting that is listed, and if you look up the specs on it, it says that you can have a clearance of 2 inches or 3 inches. But this was a sticking point with DOE. And so we went back and forth with DOE, and we consented that we will do a 6-inch clearance. So be aware that those are our 2 clearances now. It's either if it's a listed B vent, you have a 1-inch clearance. If it is not a listed B vent, you must have 6-inch clearance. That makes sense? So back to that, this example here, if you have an unlined masonry chimney, how much of a clearance should you have on it?
Six inches.
Yeah, so you need a 6-inch clearance. Now, we could get into the semantics on that a little bit, but we probably will save that for another day. But be aware if you are, when you're doing that and air sealing that and building a dam around that, make sure that you're accounting for a 6-inch clearance on that. And that section in the field guide that I was just in, that actually shows how when you are air sealing it, it also shows you how to install the insulation dam as part of that measure. So, all right, let's see, here's the next one. I don't know if you can see it very well in this picture, but it says if you have a pre-existing PVC vent that is touching a B vent in a shared chase. So this is one that we recently came across, and you can see that there's a B vent off the water heater. And when Weatherization got there, they had already, somebody before Weatherization had already installed a furnace, and they had vented the furnace right next to the B vent, and the PVC was touching the B vent. So when do we fix that? And when do we leave it alone? What are some scenarios when we could fix that?
I want to say air sealing. Air
What's that?
sealing.
What's that? You want
When
to
you're
say?
doing some air sealing there.
You want to say?
You can only do it if you installing the water heater, correct?
So if we were installing a new water heater, then that would actually trigger the code compliance part of the health and safety guidance. So then we could bring the venting on the new water heater up to code. So that would work well. And you'd have the same scenario if you were installing a new furnace. It would then trigger the code compliance part of the health and safety. What other scenarios What else would allow us to fix this?
I'm gonna say maybe attic insulation.
Yeah, if you got up in the attic and you saw that those vents were touching and they were near insulation. Yeah, that's a good one. When would we leave it alone? If we evaluated this house and there was no opportunity to do anything to either of those appliances, would we need to leave this one alone?
Yes.
Yeah, there's nothing under our health and safety plan that would allow us to address this. You guys feeling uneasy about that? I don't love it.
I don't like it either. Sounds risky.
It does sound risky.
No offense, I don't like the glue on the PVC. It's the wrong glue.
Gotcha. We'll come back to that one in a minute. What about this one? If a pre-existing B vent runs through a finished space, like a closet, and it does not have the minimum required clearance from combustibles, like drywall or paneling or carpeting or clothing, when would you fix it? So this house was a vented wall furnace or wall heater, and during the process of weatherization, they did not touch that appliance at all. So should they have fixed this? Should they have left it alone? What should they do here?
Leave it alone.
When could they fix this?
If you're doing any work on the furnace, pre-existing, like a furnace tune-up, then you can fix it.
Yeah, if we're going to touch the appliance, we can fix the vent. If we're not going to touch the appliance, we can't fix the vent. And then when you jump up in the attic, if you're going to air seal or insulate, then you can put a dam up in the attic. But if you're not, then you can't. So, oh, here's another one. Pre-existing water heater vent. This picture does, this one actually is up to code, but this was the only picture I had. So if you ran into this situation and it wasn't up to code, if the water heater vent was less than 2 feet above and or less than 10 feet away from the intake on the evaporative cooler, then when could you fix it? And when would you need to leave it alone?
We would fix it.
So that would be a health and safety measure you would add it and then make it a little bit longer.
Yeah. When would you not be allowed to do that? What if you weren't doing anything on the water heater?
No,
You'd have
fix it.
to make sure the swamp cooler doesn't work.
So if the swamp cooler works, then you'd be allowed to do it?
I would think so. You don't want to poison the family. That's pretty much a backdrafting appliance, but not at the same time.
So what would be making the health and safety situation worse? Weatherization.
So here we go. What happens if you do a worst case draft with it running? Obviously, you run the swamp cooler, starts backdrafting, then you can touch it.
That's a good point. You can touch it if it fails worst case. Because we are required to make sure everything vents safely.
Yeah, but the swamp cooler.
The problem is the swamp cooler is going to suck all the flue gases back into the house.
Mm-hmm. So, Jesse, it sounds like you're leaning towards you would never leave that alone.
No, you have to fix it
No,
to meet
because
code.
it's still putting the carbon dioxide back into the house. I mean, you could, and in the wintertime, you can't run the swamp cooler to, get a reading of if it is or not. But
I like where you're going with it, though. You're looking for evidence that it's actually backdrafting. So if you could show that it was putting CO into the home, then you could address it as a health and safety measure. Is that what you're thinking?
yeah, but in this situation, you're not going to run it in the wintertime either. So
Yeah. Gotcha. This one's got me. I feel like this one you could make a case for addressing it. And it really is. You get back into the guidance on. Let me go to. Goodness, am I going the right direction here? Combustion gases. It says you have to have adequate combustion air and proper venting to the outside for combustion appliances. And that's required. So proper venting to the outside is required. But then we've got this little caveat that's saying if you're getting correct venting, high ECO, and combustion air issues, that addressing them, you can only address them when it's going to be exacerbated by weatherization. So it might seem like a little bit of a catch-22. Like, how do we do this if we can't really prove that weatherization is going to make it any worse or not?
Yeah, and this kind of all goes back to I think a technical meeting a couple months ago where we were talking about having proper justification on these measures. You really need to be thinking about how you're going to justify that. If the water heater did vent, you did not work on it, you'd need to have a good way to justify extending up that flue. Basically, and the justification is something that made the health and safety situation worse by weatherization. And I would point out too, Matt, like on this, if you were not going to replace that or extend it up, it still should be a health and safety item on the auditor's health and safety form. And if they can't address it with weatherization, they still should tell the client to fix it.
Yes, thank you for that, Dalton.
You know what I mean? Like, it shouldn't be skipped. It shouldn't be a skipped health and safety item altogether. Like, either if you can't justifiably do it under weatherization, at a minimum, the auditor still needs to be documenting it and putting it as the client's responsibility and educating the client on what they can do to make their house safer.
Yeah, so
if there's not a justifiable cause.
Exactly what Dalton's talking about. I put together an example of, so if you ever have any of these scenarios and you feel like you've looked at it from all angles and you cannot figure out how to address it under weatherization and you need to leave it alone, then what do? You do exactly what Dalton's saying. This is, as for auditors, when you guys are auditing a house and you identify these issues, you are still required to document that you noticed the issue and document that you've educated the client about what to do. So here's an example where I just made some notes that says the problem was a B vent does not have required clearance from combustibles. The location of the issue, upstairs bedroom closet. So that picture I showed you of the vent running through the closet. Client responsibilities, keep the area clear of combustibles and consider a permanent repair. Agency responsibilities, none. And what did the agency do? They educated the client on the risk of fire and advised the client to consider a permanent repair.
And I wonder, Jesse, on that house that you guys worked on, if you had something like this, basically where noted to the client, documented that you told that client, look, your flue's not baffled around. We can't address it under weatherization, but it is a fire hazard. If you had that documentation, if that would have helped you guys out at all or not, I don't know, but it may have, to where it wasn't like you guys didn't address the issue, even though you physically didn't. You educated the client on what they need to do. But I don't know if that would have helped or not in that situation.
So this actually started as an exercise where Dalton and I started seeing a few things out in the field, and we were wondering why they weren't addressed. But as I dug into the guidance from DOE, I feel like it kind of got turned on its head for me, because it really became more of an exercise of, when are we allowed to spend DOE money to fix this stuff, and when are we not allowed to do that? And so I hope this really helps you guys to realize, anytime you run into these weird situations, go back to the guidelines and look at them and say, is this a legitimate health and safety issue? If so, then just document how it meets the definition of a health and safety measure, and you're good to go, and you can move forward and address it. And if it is not, if you can't see a way to fix a problem like this, at the bare minimum, you must be documenting it, educating the client about it, and getting their signature. But if you still just feel uneasy about something, then reach out to one of us at the state, because stuff like this, we will give written permission from time to time to address stuff like this with other funding sources such as LIHEAP or Dominion. So, and that's, we do want to try and align those other funding sources as much as possible with our DOE guidance. And so that's why we don't have like a blanket statement that says, anytime you can't do it with DOE, then go ahead and just spend whatever money you want. That's why we will continue to address this stuff on a case-by-case basis. But anyway, so those were the 3 health and safety items. How are you guys feeling about all that before I move on to the last measure, or the last item? Does that make sense? You guys feel like you're equipped to go out and address these issues when you see them, and you know what to do, or do you still have some unanswered questions? If you, in the course of the next couple of weeks, if you run across issues and you're still trying to put all the pieces together, give me a call. We can talk about it. I love to see what else you guys are running into out there. The last item I had was the attic scuttle. Oh no, it's not the last. We haven't talked about ventilation. I think it gets a little easier from here though. So this part will go a little quicker. So what if you go into a house and these 2 vents were exhaust fans? So you have pre-existing exhaust fans that terminate in an attic. When do you fix them, and when do you leave them alone?
Obviously, we can fix them if we're going to be replacing the exhaust fan for a new ASHRAE exhaust fan. We're going to fix it. But realistically, if we're not going to be, if the ASHRAE doesn't call for, say, a new fan, and the house doesn't require an exhaust, we can just leave them alone.
What do you guys think?
Does the attic have a zonal of 50?
Where are you going with that? I'm following you. Why would you care about
the attic is still connected to the house, and you're putting contaminants into the attic? That means they can potentially come back into the house.
Yeah. So you're saying what could come back in the house?
Well, just the moisture that we're trying to get rid of, or say that was a dryer vent that was just exhausting into the attic.
Yeah. So there's a health and safety table of issues item that is called mold and moisture. And under mold and moisture, it says clothes dryer and exhaust fans must vent to the outdoors. Venting, installation, or repairs is an allowable health and safety measure. And the reason why, when you go back to that definition of a health and safety measure, is because everything we do in weatherization will exacerbate this problem. Everything we do will make it worse. If we air seal that house and there's moisture in the house, it will make it worse. If we dump the moisture into the attic, whether we added insulation or not, our whole goal is to make the home more energy efficient. If we're just dumping moisture into insulation, that's reducing the R value. And that's going to make the whole situation worse. And so that's why this one's simple and it's cut and dry. All exhaust fans must vent to the outdoors every time on every house. So
That's unless it's a half bath, right?
I went back and forth with Dalton on that on a half bath. If you ran into a half bath, and like, I could go either way on that one, honestly. Our guidance says that clothes dryer and exhaust fans must vent to the outdoors. The half baths are important to be aware of because when you're talking about ASHRAE, half baths are not local exhaust fans because they're not in a room with bulk moisture. But yeah, I really feel like I could kind of go either way on them. I'm leaning a little more towards just keeping the rule simple and just saying just vent all of your fans to the exterior every time. But if I ran into a scenario where you had a half bath and it would have been complex to get to it, you know, I could see making a case for leaving it alone. But
I think we should vent them every time, because if there is moisture in the home, whether it's, you know, the humidity is going to be relatively the same throughout the house. So
that's a good point.
On that half bath fan, you're still probably going to be putting, you know, just as much moisture, maybe not as much as when somebody's actually taking a shower, but the half bath would still be taking whatever moisture's in the house and kicking it up in the attic. But
that's a really good point. So pre-existing exhaust fans, it's always we're always going to vent them to the outdoors. And there was a couple of things. If you look in the field guide, there were a couple of things I wanted to point out. I feel like we're pretty good at this, but just be aware these standards are listed in the field guide. So your range hood and your bath fans must vent to the exterior. They must have a damper. They must be insulated to an R8. So if they're running through an unconditioned space, they must be insulated to an R8. They cannot dump into a soffit. They must be vented to a legitimate exhaust termination. If the existing vent flex duct, this was something Dalton and I were discussing. This one's really, I don't know if this is included in the field guide. We may need to add that if we're gonna to our standard. But if the existing vent flex duct is flex duct, it can be left alone if it's in good working order. But if it's not insulated, then you've got to address that. So you know, but if you find there's flex duct running under attic insulation and it's in good working order, then you can leave it alone. If you're installing new, you shouldn't be installing flex though. All newly installed venting that is not enclosed within the building cavity should be rigid duct wherever possible. There may be a few scenarios where you're trying to run something new and you got some weird angles in a building cavity that you may need to run a little section with some flex, but anything that's not in the cavity should be rigid wherever possible.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
There's a lot of newer houses being built now where it's very common practice to put the exhaust termination into a vented soffit, and it's down low against the ceiling, buried with insulation. So I don't know, are we supposed to change those? Because that's how they were built originally.
yes.
Matt?
Oh, he muted me.
You scared him away.
I guess
Oh,
so.
must have dropped off, huh?
Matt, we lost you.
Yeah, I think the guidance there, Scott, is that it needs to be a legitimate termination. So if you can kick the fan on and figure out which soffit pieces you need to drop out, and that's why we were saying you can use that original flex if it's adequate. Like if you're not changing out the fan, and so it's still just the standard fan, and you take out that soffit piece and actually put in a soffit termination and connect it, then that's what you need to do. So
They're building like that here.
see if Turner jumps back on here. You probably lost the internet for a minute. I might be able to pull up his.
Hey, Dalton, if we run into a house with a rain show that's just recirculating the air back into the kitchen, are we supposed to actually vent that outside?
No, just when they're venting out. So just when it's.
Hey, I'm back on the phone.
All right. Did you hear Scott's question?
I did not. What was it?
I'll let him tell you again.
There's newer houses being built, and they're still doing it today, to where they just vent the bathroom fans into the vented soffit. So the whole exhaust vent is buried in the insulation, and it's vented right into the soffit, into the vented soffit, and that's how they're building them even now. So
Yeah.
Ellen was saying we should still try to just add the termination if that's the case.
Yeah, I would like to see that. How does everybody feel about that? I'd like to see it, but I know that it's not the simplest thing. I was out with the guys in Utah County, and we were trying to identify where an exhaust fan terminated, and that's not a simple thing to do. So I'm a little uncertain on that one. But if as an auditor, if you can identify where they terminate and you could add a proper termination, that would be a better way to go on that. So that because the way they terminate in those soffits, they still could dump moisture back in, if not completely into the house, they can dump moisture back into that insulation that's near that soffit termination, because that's not a airtight seal. But out in the real world, I don't know that we're going to get that perfect scenario where we can address everyone every time. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Kapinski had a good question too for you, Jason. If you want to ask Turner.
If we come into a house with a rain show that's just recirculating in the kitchen, are we required to actually vent that outside as well?
No, that's a great question though. So it's just recirculating in that room. It's not actually pushing moisture out into the attic, right?
Correct.
So yeah, and that one.
It could be advantageous for you to vent it out if the circumstances would allow you to not have to add in a continuous ventilation. So if it helps out with your ASHRAE deficit, it may be worth venting out a kitchen range hood, but it wouldn't be required.
Yeah.
And we have done that in the past. We've put it outside if it helps our ASHRAE fan, our ASHRAE compliance.
Yep.
And that ends up being a separate health and safety measure, right? So you would be installing that to address ASHRAE compliance, and it would allow you to do that. That's a great question.
So another question. Obviously, if you have an exhaust fan up in an attic, but you have vermiculite up there and you get it tested and it's positive with asbestos, obviously you want to vent it out, but our guidelines state that we should not get in an attic if the vermiculite's positive.
Yes.
So what do we do about that?
You follow that guideline. You can't get up there, and you then need to take into account everything else you're doing under weatherization and decide if you can install any other measures without making the problem worse. If you feel like you can without, you know, adding more moisture to the attic or anything like that, then you could proceed with other weatherization measures. If you cannot, then you would defer the whole job until the asbestos has been remediated.
Okay.
But yeah, great question. What about, hopefully you guys can see my my screen again. What about this one? What about, this is a dryer vent that terminates in the attic. What do we do there?
Dryer vents always need to be vented to the outdoors.
Yeah, same as an exhaust fan for this, all the same reasons. We don't want to dump moisture in there. So we would want to vent that to the outdoors, just like the exhaust fan. And the one point I wanted to make with dryer vents, just like exhaust fans, are always going to be a pre-existing issue. Like, we don't ever install new washers and dryers. So we're, you know, it's always going to be, the dryer vent is a pre-existing issue. And we're always looking to bring the dryer vent up to our current standard. So if the dryer vent doesn't meet our current standard, which is in the field guide, let's see if I can click this link to get there, then you need to bring it up to the standard. So check out the field guide. It'll walk you through everything that is, you know, what our standard is. I think I made a short list of what that standard is here. Oh, that's attic scuttle. So dryer venting, same thing as exhaust fans. If it anywhere it extends outside of the conditioned space, or outside the thermal boundary, sorry, you need to bring it to an R8. If the dryer venting that's not enclosed within a building cavity, all of that must be rigid duct. And then if you ever get into a situation where your dryer vent or duct exceeds 35 feet, you may have to reroute it or install a fan assist to bring it up to the standard. So, but any questions on all of that? I think I'm going to save the attic scuttle for later. It's enough of a shift away from these. It's not a health and safety item, so I think we'll save it for another meeting since we've gone over time on that. But yeah, hopefully this was helpful. Really the main point is measure all of these against the health and safety guidance and make sure you're following that. And anytime you're feeling uncomfortable about something, make sure you're taking every opportunity to address it under the health and safety guidance. And if you still feel uncomfortable about it, reach out to us and we'll see if we can help you. So, anything else before we end? All right. Well, thank you guys for your participation, and thank you for all that you're doing. You guys have a great day.